Have you ever been judged in your worst moment, by someone who didn't even know your story? The rain falls in thin, relentless sheets, tapping against the glass windows of a small downtown cafe just off Fifth Avenue, the kind of place where people rush in, order something warm, and leave without ever really looking at each other. But tonight, Emily Carter doesn't have that luxury. Her fingers tighten around the strap of her worn canvas bag as she stands at the counter, her heart pounding louder than the storm outside. She already knows what's coming before the cashier even speaks. "I'm sorry, you're short." The words land softly, almost apologetically, but they hit harder than they should. Emily glances down at the few crumpled bills in her hand, counts again like maybe the numbers will magically change, but they don't, they never do. I thought I had enough," she whispers, her voice barely steady. The people behind her shift impatiently, someone sighs, someone checks their watch, the world keeps moving, indifferent. The cashier gives her a small, sympathetic smile. "It's okay, you can step aside if you want," and just like that, she nods, cheeks burning, stepping out of line as if she's shrinking out of existence. Outside, the cold hits immediately, sharp and unforgiving, soaking through her thin jacket in seconds. She pulls it tighter, but it does nothing, not really. She hasn't eaten since yesterday morning. Her last interview ended with a polite rejection, and her landlord's message still echoes in her mind: Friday. No exceptions. She exhales slowly, watching her breath fade into the night air, trying to figure out what to do next, and that's when she notices him, standing just a few feet away under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, a man in a dark, worn coat, his posture still, almost rigid, like he's been there for a while, his hair slightly damp from the rain, his expression unreadable, cold even. He isn't asking for help, isn't reaching out, just watching, and for a moment, their eyes meet, hers tired but soft. His sharp, distant, like he's already decided something about her without saying a word. Emily looks away first, wrapping her arms around herself as she steps toward the sidewalk, but then his voice cuts through the rain, low, controlled. "You didn't have enough money." She stops, hesitates, then turns back slightly, unsure if she should even respond. "No," she admits quietly, not bothering to explain, because what's the point? People don't really care, not strangers. Not in a city like this. There's a pause, just long enough to feel uncomfortable, and then he speaks again. His tone colder this time, almost detached. "People like you always expect someone else to step in." The words hang in the air between them, heavier than the storm. Emily blinks, caught off guard. A flicker of something crosses her face, not anger, not quite, just disappointment, like she's heard this before in 100 different ways. She studies him for a second, really looks this time. The tired lines around his eyes, the way his hands are tucked into his coat like he's holding himself together, and then, without saying another word, she turns and walks away into the rain, leaving him standing there alone, the sound of her footsteps fading into the city. But something about that moment doesn't sit right, not with him, not at all, because for the first time in a long time, Alexander Hayes feels something shift, small, quiet, and completely unexpected. The rain does not stop that night. It only softens, turning from a sharp downpour into a quiet drizzle that clings to the city like a second skin. And Emily walks without direction, her sneakers soaked through, each step heavier than the last, her stomach tight with hunger but her mind louder than anything else, replaying those words over and over again. "People like you always expect someone else to step in." She exhales slowly, shaking her head as if she can physically push the sentence out of her thoughts, because it is not true. It has never been true. She has worked double shifts, skipped meals, walked miles just to save bus fare. No one has ever stepped in for her, not once, and yet somehow a stranger had looked at her and decided that was who she was. She stops at a crosswalk, the red light reflecting off the wet pavement, and for a moment she just stands there, watching cars pass, warm and dry inside their sealed worlds, and then she laughs quietly to herself, not because anything is funny, but because if she does not laugh, she might break. Across the street, a small convenience store glows under fluorescent lights, and after a brief hesitation, she steps inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. The warmth hits her face instantly, and she walks straight to the back where the discounted items sit on a metal rack, her fingers brushing over plastic-wrapped sandwiches and day-old pastries. She counts her money again, slower this time, more careful, until she finds something she can afford, a simple sandwich, nothing special, but enough. She pays without speaking much, nodding at the cashier, and steps back out into the damp night, the rain now barely noticeable, just a mist in the air. She unwraps the sandwich slowly, taking a small bite, letting the warmth settle into her empty stomach, and for the first time all day, her shoulders relax just a little, but then she sees him again, the same man from earlier, still standing not far from where she left him, as if he has not moved at all, his coat darker now from the rain, his expression unchanged, and something about that stops her in her tracks, because no one stays in the cold like that unless they have nowhere else to go. She watches him for a second, maybe two, her grip tightening slightly around the sandwich, and she should keep walking, she knows she should. He had judged her, dismissed her, reduced her to something small, but still, something inside her refuses to let it go. She sighs under her breath, almost annoyed with herself, and then before she can change her mind, she walks back toward him, her step steady despite the hesitation in her chest. He notices her approach this time, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if surprised she came back at all, and for a moment neither of them speaks, the space between them filled only with the distant hum of traffic and the soft drip of rain from the awning above. Then Emily holds out the sandwich, her hand firm despite the slight tremor in her fingers. "You look like you need this more than I do," she says quietly, not meeting his eyes at first, and he does not move, does not reach for it, just looks at her like he is trying to understand something that does not make sense. "Why?" he asks finally, his voice lower than before, less sharp but still guarded. Emily shrugs lightly, finally glancing up at him, her expression simple, honest. "Because someone should," she replies, as if it is the most obvious thing in the world, and that answer, so small, so unguarded, lands harder than anything else she could have said, because for the first time that night, Alexander Hayes does not have a response, not one that fits the world he thought he understood, and slowly, almost reluctantly, he reaches out and takes the sandwich from her hand, his fingers brushing hers for just a second, cold against warm, and something shifts again, deeper this time, something he cannot ignore anymore. Alexander does not eat the sandwich right away, he just stands there holding it, staring down at something so simple it almost feels foreign in his hands, the plastic wrapper crinkling softly as the city moves on around them, and Emily notices, of course she does, because people who have gone without learn to recognize hesitation around food. "It is still warm," she says gently, nodding toward it, as if that might help him decide, and for a second he almost says something sharp again. Something to push her away, something familiar, but the words do not come this time. Instead he unwraps it slowly, taking a small bite, and it is nothing special, just bread and turkey and a slice of cheese, but it is enough to make him pause, because it tastes real, uncomplicated, undeserved. He swallows, then looks at her again, really looks this time, her damp hair clinging to her face, her jacket too thin for the weather, her hands slightly red from the cold, and yet there is no resentment in her expression, no expectation, just quiet resolve. "You should not have done that," he says after a moment, his voice lower now, less guarded, and she gives a small shrug, glancing up at the cloudy sky as if the answer is written somewhere above them. "Maybe," she admits, "but I would have felt worse if I did not," and that lands somewhere deeper than he is ready to admit, because that is not how his world works. In his world, every action has a cost, every kindness is calculated, every relationship measured against what it returns, but this makes no sense at all, and yet it happened anyway. He finishes the sandwich slowly, almost thoughtfully, then folds the wrapper in his hand as if it matters, as if it should not just be thrown away. "What is your name?" he asks suddenly, the question surprising even himself. Emily hesitates for a fraction of a second before answering. "Emily," she says, simple, direct, and then she adds, "Emily Carter," like she wants to make sure it is real, like she wants him to remember it. He nods once, committing it to memory without meaning to. "I am Alex," he replies, the name coming out easily, naturally, a version of the truth that reveals nothing and everything at the same time. There is a brief silence after that, not awkward, just unfamiliar, like neither of them knows what comes next. Emily shifts her weight slightly, glancing back toward the street where traffic continues to blur into streaks of light. "You should find somewhere warm," she says finally, her voice softer now, less guarded than before, and he almost laughs at that, almost, because the irony is not lost on him. He owns buildings that stretch into the skyline, rooms filled with warmth and light and comfort, and yet here he is, standing in the cold being told to take care of himself by someone who has far less. I will, he says instead, because it is easier than explaining anything. She studies him for a moment longer, like she is trying to decide if she believes him, then nods once, satisfied enough. Good, she says quietly, and just like that, she turns to leave again, her step steady despite the exhaustion that lingers in every movement, and this time he does not stop her. He just watches as she disappears into the city, the faint sound of her footsteps fading into the night. But something about this feels unfinished, incomplete, and as he stands there holding the empty wrapper, Alexander Hayes realizes that for the first time in years, he does not want to let a moment like this end without understanding it, without knowing where it leads, and that thought alone is enough to change everything that comes next. The night lingers longer than it should, stretching into something quiet and unsettled, and Alexander does not move for a while after Emily disappears, the empty wrapper still in his hand as if it carries more weight than it should. The city feels different now, not because anything has changed, but because he has, even if only slightly, and that realization is enough to pull him back, not toward warmth, but toward something unfinished, something unresolved, and by the time he finally turns away from the streetlight, the rain has stopped completely, leaving behind a damp silence that clings to everything. The next morning arrives too quickly, sunlight breaking through the clouds as if the night never happened, but for Emily, it did, it always does. She wakes up in her small rented room with the faint sound of traffic filtering through thin walls, her body stiff from the cold she carried in with her. Her phone lighting up beside her with a reminder she cannot ignore, interview at 10:30, she sits up slowly, running a hand through her hair as she exhales. This is it, she does not have another chance after this, not with rent overdue, not with savings gone. She dresses carefully, choosing the cleanest blouse she has, smoothing out wrinkles with her hands because she does not own an iron. Her reflection in the mirror is not perfect, but it is enough, it has to be. Across the city, Alexander stands in front of a wall of glass overlooking the skyline, dressed now in a tailored suit that fits him like it was made for him, because it was, the cold, worn coat from the night before gone, replaced by something sharp, precise, controlled, everything about him back in place, except for one thing. His gaze lingers, distant, unfocused, replaying a moment that should not matter but does. His assistant's voice breaks through his thoughts, steady and professional. Your first meeting is in 40 minutes. The candidates are already being processed downstairs. He nods. Without looking away from the city, add one more to the list, he says. Suddenly, his tone calm but firm. Emily Carter. There is a brief pause behind him, subtle but noticeable. She is not on the scheduled applicants. The assistant replies carefully, and for a moment, silence stretches between them. Then Alexander turns slightly, his expression unreadable. She is now, he says, simple, final, no room for question. Downstairs, Emily steps into the lobby of Hayes Group for the first time, and everything about it feels overwhelming, the polished floors reflecting light like glass, the quiet hum of conversations spoken in low, confident voices, people moving with purpose, belonging. She tightens her grip on her bag as she approaches the reception desk, her name barely steady when she says it, Emily Carter. I am here for the interview. The receptionist glances at the screen, brows knitting slightly. One moment, she says, typing quickly, and Emily's heart skips, just for a second, fear creeping in that something has gone wrong, that she is too late, that she is not supposed to be here. And then the receptionist looks up again, her expression shifting into something more neutral, almost respectful. You have been added to the list, please take a seat. Emily blinks, confused but relieved, nodding as she moves toward the waiting area, unaware of the quiet decision that brought her here, unaware that somewhere above her, behind glass and steel and distance, Alexander Hayes is already watching the outcome unfold, not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as a man who cannot quite explain why one simple act of kindness refuses to leave his mind. Time moves slower when you are waiting for something that could change your life, and for Emily, every second in that glass-walled lobby feels heavier than the last, her eyes drifting between the other candidates seated around her, each one polished, confident, dressed like they belong here, while she sits with her hands folded tightly in her lap, reminding herself to breathe, to stay steady, to not let the doubt creep in. Because she has come too far to fall apart now. A receptionist calls The first name, then another, voices calm, controlled, one by one they disappear behind a set of sleek double doors, and Emily waits, listening to the faint echo of footsteps and distant conversations, her heartbeat syncing with the quiet rhythm of the building, until finally, Emily Carter. The name sounds unfamiliar in a place like this, like it does not quite fit, but she stands anyway, shoulders straight, chin lifted just enough, and follows the assistant down a long corridor lined with glass offices and muted tones. Everything clean, precise, intentional, the kind of place where nothing is left to chance. They stop in front of a conference room, and as the door opens, Emily steps inside expecting a panel, a standard interview, something predictable. But instead she finds only one chair occupied at the far end of the table, a figure standing near the window with his back turned, looking out over the city, and for a brief moment, something about the posture feels familiar, but she cannot place it, not yet. "You can go ahead and take a seat," the assistant says before quietly stepping out, leaving the door to close with a soft click, sealing the room in silence. Emily sits slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the table as she tries to steady herself. And then the man turns, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough for the light from the window to fall across his face, and everything inside her stops, the air, the sound, the certainty she walked in with, because standing there, dressed in a tailored suit, composed and untouchable, is the same man from the night before, the one who stood in the rain, the one who judged her, the one who took the sandwich from her hand. "You," the word slips out before she can stop it, barely a whisper, but loud enough in the silence. Alexander does not react the way she expects. There is no apology, no explanation, just a calm, measured look as he studies her reaction, as if this moment is exactly where he expected it to lead. "Good morning, Emily," he says, his voice controlled, professional now, as if the streetlight, the rain, the conversation they shared belongs to a completely different world. "Thank you for coming in." She stares at him, confusion mixing with something sharper, something closer to disbelief. "You are the one interviewing me?" she asks, her voice steadier than she feels, and he nods once, simple, undeniable. "I am," he replies, and for a second she cannot find words, because nothing about this makes sense, not the way he spoke to her, not the way he stands here now, not the fact that he holds a position of power she did not even know existed when she offered him her last meal, and slowly, the realization begins to settle, not just who he is, but what that means, and the question that follows lands heavier than anything else. "Was that some kind of test?" she asks, her eyes fixed on his, searching for something real, something honest, but his expression does not give much away, not yet, and the silence that follows stretches just long enough to make everything feel uncertain, because this is no longer just an interview, it is something else entirely, something neither of them can step away from now. The question lingers between them, sharp and unavoidable, and for a moment, Alexander says nothing, not because he does not have an answer, but because the truth is more complicated than anything he could say in a single sentence. He studies her carefully, the way her posture has shifted, no longer uncertain but guarded now, her eyes steady, demanding something real, and that alone tells him more than any resume ever could. "No," he says finally, his voice calm, measured, "it was not a test." But even as the words leave his mouth, he knows they are only half the truth, because what happened last night was not planned, not in the way she thinks, but it still revealed something he cannot ignore. Emily lets out a quiet breath, not relief, not quite, more like frustration. "It felt like one," she replies, her tone controlled but firm. "You stood there and decided who I was without knowing anything about me." Her words land clean, direct. And he does not interrupt, because she is right. And for the first time in a long time, he does not try to defend himself immediately. "I did," he admits, the honesty simple, unpolished, and that seems to catch her off guard more than anything else, because she expected denial, or justification, not this, not acknowledgement. "Then why am I here?" she asks, leaning forward slightly, her hands resting on the table now, no longer hiding the tension in her fingers, and that is the question he has been turning over in his mind since the moment she walked away the night before. "Because you came back," he says, and there is something different in his voice now, quieter, less controlled. "You did not have to, but you did." Emily frowns slightly, confusion mixing with disbelief. "I gave you a sandwich," she says, as if trying to reduce it to something small, something insignificant, but he shakes his head once, slowly. You gave something you could not afford to lose, he corrects, and the room falls into a brief silence after that, the kind that does not feel empty, but heavy with meaning neither of them expected to confront. Emily leans back slightly, processing, her expression softening just a fraction, but the doubt is still there. That does not explain why I am sitting in a corporate office instead of being turned away at the door, she says, her voice quieter now, more thoughtful than defensive, and Alexander steps away from the window, closing the distance between them just enough to shift the energy in the room. It explains everything, he replies, and now his gaze is steady, focused entirely on her, because this company is built on decisions, on judgment, on who we choose to trust and invest in, and last night, you made a decision without knowing what you would get in return. He pauses for a second, just long enough for the weight of his words to settle. That is not something I see often. Emily watches him closely, searching for any sign that this is manipulation, that this is just another version of power disguised as opportunity, but there is something different in the way he speaks now, something less distant, less certain, and that unsettles her more than anything else. So what? This is some kind of reward? She asks, her tone cautious, almost testing, and he exhales softly, shaking his head. No, he says, it is an opportunity. The distinction is clear, intentional, and she feels it, even if she does not fully trust it yet. And if I say no? She asks, her eyes meeting his. Without hesitation, and for a brief moment, something like respect flickers across his expression. Then you walk out of here exactly the way you walked in, he answers, with your choice intact, and that answer, more than anything else, shifts something inside her, because for the first time since she entered the building, this does not feel like a trap, it feels like a decision, her decision. And as the silence settles again, Emily realizes that whatever happens next is no longer about him testing her, but about whether she is willing to step into a world she never expected to be part of. The silence does not feel empty anymore, it feels like a line drawn between two different lives, and Emily can feel herself standing right at the edge of it, her fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the table as she looks at him, really looks this time, not the man in the rain, not the stranger under the streetlight, but the man in front of her now, composed, controlled, powerful in a way that changes the air in the room, and somehow that makes everything more complicated, not less. I do not need a favor, she says finally, her voice steady but quieter now, more deliberate, and Alexander does not interrupt, does not correct her, because he knows what she is really saying. She is not talking about the job, she is talking about dignity, about not being reduced to a moment of kindness that someone else decides to repay. It is not a favor, he replies, his tone even, but there is something firmer beneath it now, something that does not waver. If it were, I would have offered you something easier. That catches her attention, her brows knitting slightly as she studies him, and he continues, this position is not simple, it requires judgment, consistency, and the ability to make decisions without knowing the outcome. He pauses briefly, letting the weight of that settle. Exactly what you did last night. Emily exhales slowly, her gaze dropping for just a second before returning to him, because part of her understands what he is saying, but another part refuses to accept it so easily. You are building a story out of one moment, she says, her tone sharper now, not defensive, but cautious, like she is protecting something. You do not know me, and there it is, the truth neither of them can ignore. Alexander nods once, acknowledging it without hesitation. You are right, he says, and again, the honesty disarms more than any argument would. I do not know you. He takes a step closer, not enough to invade her space, just enough to make the conversation feel more real, more grounded. But I know what I saw. His voice lowers slightly, not softer, but more focused, and I know how rare that is. Emily shakes her head faintly, a small, almost disbelieving gesture, because she has spent so long being overlooked, underestimated, invisible in rooms like this, that being seen now feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. And if I fail? She asks, her eyes meeting his again, direct, unflinching, and this time the question is not about the job. It is about stepping into something she has never had before, the risk of proving every doubt right. And Alexander does not hesitate. Then you fail, he answers simply, no hesitation, no cushioning, just truth, but it will be on your terms, not because someone decided you were not worth the chance. And that lands differently, deeper, because it shifts the narrative from being chosen to choosing, from being given something to earning it. Emily sits with that for a moment. The tension in her shoulders easing just slightly as she processes what that really means. This is not about him rescuing her. It is about whether she is willing to take a step forward when the ground is uncertain. She looks around the room briefly, the polished surfaces, the quiet confidence of everything in place, and then back at him, the man who stood in the rain and judged her, and now stands here offering something he cannot fully explain, and slowly, something shifts inside her, not trust, not yet, but something close to it. Something that sounds a lot like resolve. Okay, she says finally, the word simple but steady, carrying more weight than it seems, and for the first time since she walked into the building, the tension in the room changes, not disappearing, but transforming into something new, something neither of them fully understands yet, but both recognize as the beginning of something that will not be easy, and will not be simple, but will matter in ways neither of them expected. The decision settles between them like something fragile but real, and for the first time since she walked into the building, Emily feels the weight of it fully, not as pressure from him, but as something she chose, something she now has to carry forward. Alexander studies her for a brief moment, as if confirming that she understands what she just stepped into, and then the atmosphere shifts almost instantly, not dramatically, but with the quiet efficiency of someone used to moving from decision to action. Then we begin now, he says, his tone returning to something more structured, more professional, but there is still a trace of that earlier honesty beneath it. He gestures toward the chair across from him, and Emily straightens slightly, instinctively adjusting her posture, preparing herself for what comes next. Tell me how you would handle a situation where you have limited resources, no clear instructions, and a decision that affects more than just you, he asks, the question direct, deliberate, and she recognizes it immediately for what it is, not a test of knowledge, but a test of instinct, of judgment, of who she is when there is no script to follow. She takes a slow breath, her mind briefly flashing back to the night before, the rain, the cold, the moment she stood there with something she could not afford to give, and yet chose to anyway. I would start by understanding what matters most, she says, her voice steady now, more confident than before. Not what is easiest, not what looks right on the surface, but what actually impacts the people involved. Alexander watches her closely, not interrupting, not correcting, just listening, and she continues, and then I would make the best decision I can with what I have, even if it is not perfect, because waiting for perfect usually means doing nothing. The room falls quiet again after she finishes, but this time the silence feels different, not uncertain, but focused, like something has just aligned. Alexander nods once, slowly. Good, he says, and the single word carries more weight than a longer response ever could. He moves to the table, placing a thin folder in front of her. This is a real project, he explains, a community outreach program that has been stalled for months. Too many opinions, not enough action. Emily glances down at the folder, her fingers brushing against the edge as she opens it carefully, pages filled with notes, proposals, unfinished ideas, and she feels it immediately, the complexity, the uncertainty, the lack of clear direction. You will review this and come back to me with a plan, he continues, his voice calm but firm. Not what you think I want to hear, but what you believe should be done. She looks up at him, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face, not doubt in herself, but the weight of being trusted with something that matters, something real. When do you need it? She asks, and there is a slight pause before he answers, as if the timing itself is part of the test. Tomorrow morning, he says, simple, direct, no room for negotiation. Emily nods slowly, the reality of it settling in. This is not symbolic, this is not a gesture, this is real responsibility, real expectation, and for a brief moment, she feels the fear rise, the same quiet voice that has followed her for years, telling her she does not belong here, that she will not be enough. But this time, she does not let it take over. Instead, she closes the folder gently, holding it with both hands as she stands, her posture more grounded now, more certain. Okay, she says again, but this time it sounds different, stronger, as if she is not just agreeing, but committing. Alexander watches her for a second longer, something unreadable passing through his expression, something that looks a lot like recognition, and as she turns to leave the room, stepping back into the world that suddenly feels both familiar and completely new, he realizes that whatever this is, whatever started under a Streetlight in the rain, has already begun to change more than just her path, it is changing his as well. Morning comes faster than expected, and for Emily, it barely feels like she slept at all. The small desk in her room still covered in papers, notes, and scribbled ideas from hours of thinking, rethinking, and pushing past every doubt that tried to slow her down. She stands in front of the mirror again, just like the day before, but something is different this time, not in what she wears, not in how she looks, but in the way she holds herself, steadier, more certain, like she is no longer asking for a place in the room, but walking in knowing she has something to offer, across the city. Alexander is already in his office, reviewing reports that usually demand his full attention, but today, his focus drifts more than he expects, not because of the numbers or the decisions waiting for him, but because of one question that has stayed with him since yesterday, not whether she is capable, but whether she will walk back through that door. And when the clock moves past 9, the answer arrives, a soft knock, followed by the quiet click of the door opening. Emily steps in, the folder held firmly in her hands, her expression composed, not nervous, not overly confident, just ready. "You are early," he notes, glancing up at her, and she gives a small nod. "I did not want to be late," she replies simply, and that alone tells him more than he expected. She places the folder on the table, sliding it toward him, but does not sit immediately. Instead, she waits, as if giving him the space to decide how this moment unfolds. He opens it, flipping through the pages carefully, his eyes scanning her notes, her structure, the way she has taken something scattered and unclear and turned it into something focused, actionable, and more importantly, grounded in reality, not theory, not what sounds good, but what works. And as he reads, something shifts again, not surprise, but confirmation, the kind that does not need to be spoken out loud. After a few moments, he closes the folder, looking up at her. And there is a brief silence, not uncomfortable, just full. "You focused on execution," he says, his tone thoughtful, not presentation. Emily nods slightly, because presentation does not help if nothing actually changes. She answers, and there is no hesitation in her voice now, no second guessing, just clarity. Alexander studies her for a second longer, then stands, moving around the table, closing the distance between them, but not in a way that feels imposing, more like a shift from evaluation to something more direct, more honest. "Most people try to impress," he says. "You tried to solve the problem." Emily exhales quietly, the tension she has been holding easing just slightly. But she does not look away, does not shrink back, because this is no longer about proving something, it is about standing in what she knows she can do. And then he reaches into his jacket, pulling out something small, something unexpected, and places it gently on top of the folder, the empty wrapper from the sandwich, carefully folded, preserved in a way that makes it feel like more than just paper. Emily looks down at it, confusion flickering across her face before she looks back up at him. And for the first time since they met, there is no distance in his expression, no guarded edge, just something real, something steady. "You asked me yesterday if that was a test," he says, his voice quieter now, but clearer than ever. "It was not." He pauses, just long enough for the moment to settle, but it changed something. Emily does not speak, she just watches him, waiting, and he continues, "You gave when there was no reason to believe you would get anything back, not because it was smart, not because it was strategic, but because it was who you are." His gaze holds hers, unwavering. "That is the kind of decision this company needs." The room is silent again, but this time it feels different, complete, like something has reached its conclusion and its beginning at the same time. "The position is yours," he says finally, not as an offer, not as a favor, but as a recognition. And Emily looks at him, then down at the wrapper, then back